The old chapel fell silent as Emma stood alone at the altar, her white dress gleaming in the afternoon sun. 20 minutes had passed since her groom should have appeared. Whispers rippled through the pews like wind through prairie grass. Then, the heavy oak doors creaked open. Not her fiancé Richard, but a broad-shouldered stranger with a scarred face and piercing eyes that had seen too much. In his weathered hand, he clutched a medallion everyone recognized, the one buried with Thomas Blackwood 3 years ago. Thomas? Emma's voice broke the silence, her bouquet slipping from trembling fingers. He'd returned from the dead with haunted eyes and a leather satchel filled with secrets. What had Thomas discovered that was worth coming back from the grave to reveal? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 months earlier, Emma Harper stood on the weathered porch of her family's ranch house, watching the Montana sunrise paint the mountains gold. Blackwood Ranch stretched before her. 3,000 acres of prime grazing land, timber, and clear streams that had been in her family for 4 generations. The deed hung framed in her father's study, a constant reminder of her heritage and responsibility. "Coffee's ready," called Martha from the kitchen. Emma's aunt had moved in after Emma's father passed last winter, bringing warmth back to the old house. "Coming," Emma replied, taking one last look at the landscape. At 35, she'd grown into the role of ranch owner with the same quiet determination that had defined her father. Her hands were calloused from work, her face lightly weathered from the elements, but there was a softness in her eyes that spoke of dreams not yet fulfilled. Inside, Martha pushed a steaming mug across the table. "Bills came yesterday." Emma nodded, pulling the stack toward her. "Same story, different month. Bank sent another letter. Let me guess, another friendly reminder that we're 3 months behind on the loan." Martha's weathered face creased with concern. "This ranch has weathered worse storms." "Not without my father at the helm," Emma said quietly. The financial reality had become impossible to ignore. Drought had parched their summer grazing lands. Cattle prices had dropped. Equipment repairs mounted. Emma had taken a second mortgage, just to make payroll for the 4 ranch hands who remained. Later that morning, Emma drove into Pine Ridge, the small town that served as the commercial hub for ranchers in the valley. At the bank, she steeled herself for another difficult conversation with the loan manager. She never made it inside. A man in an impeccably tailored suit was examining her truck in the parking lot. "Admiring or appraising?" Emma asked, approaching. With the wariness rural folk reserved for city types, he turned with a smile that transformed his handsome face. "Both, I suppose. 1972. Ford, right? They don't make them like this anymore. My father would agree with you." Emma extended her hand. Emma Harper. Richard Thornton. His grip was firm, his eyes a striking blue against his tanned skin. "I was actually hoping to meet you." "Were you now?" "I'm with Thornton Group. We're looking at investment opportunities in the region." He leaned against her truck with casual confidence. "Word is, Blackwood Ranch is the crown jewel of the valley." Emma crossed her arms. "Word would be correct. Also correct that it's not for sale." Richard laughed, the sound warm and disarming. "I'm not looking to buy, Ms. Harper. I'm looking to partner. We help struggling operations modernize, expand, and thrive again. No land changing hands unless that's what the owner wants." Something in his approach, the respect in his voice when he spoke of the ranch, the lack of condescension, made Emma pause. "I've got a meeting," she said finally, "but I suppose I could hear more about this partnership idea." "Dinner tonight? The Ridge restaurant?" "I'm buying, of course." The invitation caught her off guard. It had been years since anyone had asked her to dinner, not since Thomas. "Just business," Emma clarified. "Of course." His smile suggested he'd consider it a victory either way. That evening, Martha helped Emma sort through her limited wardrobe. "You actually own a dress," her aunt teased, pulling out a simple blue garment. Very funny. Emma smoothed the fabric. It's just a business dinner. Mm-hmm. With a very handsome businessman. Who? Probably wines and dines ranchers across 3 states. Martha squeezed her niece's shoulder. Just be careful, Emma. Men like that with their smooth talk and city ways. I'm not exactly some blushing schoolgirl, Martha. No, but you've been alone a long time. At dinner, Richard outlined his vision eloquently. The Thornton Group would invest in modernizing Blackwood's operations, new irrigation systems, expanded breeding program, updated equipment. In return, they'd share in the profits for 5 years. Your land, your rules, Richard emphasized. We're investors, not managers. And when the 5 years is up, Emma asked, we shake hands and part ways, or continue if it's working well. He topped off her wine glass. I've done my research, Emma. Your father built something special here. I'd hate to see it lost to the banks. Emma studied him. Why Blackwood specifically? Potential, location, legacy. He leaned forward. And now that I've met you, determination. You strike me as someone who doesn't give up easily. The compliment warmed her more than the wine. For the first time in months, Emma felt something beyond the crushing weight of responsibility. By the time Richard walked her to her truck, she'd agreed to review his proposal. The next morning, Martha found her at the kitchen table, surrounded by printouts of the Thornton Group's past projects. Well? Martha asked, eyebrow raised. His track record seems solid. Several ranches in Idaho and Wyoming, all still in operation. And the man himself? Emma felt a blush rise to her cheeks. Professional, respectful, handsome, Martha added, with a knowing smile. That's not relevant to a business decision. Of course not. Martha poured coffee. Just remember, Emma, if something seems too good to be true. But over the next weeks, Richard proved himself beyond his initial promises. He arrived with experts who suggested practical improvements. He spent days learning the property, walking the pastures in boots that gradually lost their city shine. He listened to Emma's concerns and adjusted his proposals accordingly. And each evening, business gradually gave way to more personal conversations. Richard spoke of growing up in Seattle, building his company from scratch, his love of the Montana landscape that had drawn him to the region. Emma found herself sharing memories of her father, her childhood on the ranch, and eventually brief mentions of Thomas. Richard never pushed for details about her past. He seemed focused only on their future, a future that, with each dinner and sunset walk along the ridge, seemed increasingly intertwined. You never talk about him, Martha said one evening, as she and Emma sorted through old photographs in the ranch house living room. Her weathered fingers held up a faded picture, a young Emma and a tall, broad-shouldered young man standing before a sunset, his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. Emma took the photo, her throat tightening. Thomas Blackwood. No relation to the ranch name, just coincidence that had once seemed like fate. Not much to talk about anymore, Emma said softly. He's been gone 3 years. Martha set aside the album she'd been organizing. That doesn't mean he's gone from here. She tapped her chest. Or here. She tapped her temple. Emma placed the photo face down. Richard was coming for dinner in an hour. It felt disloyal somehow to be discussing Thomas. I found his military photo while cleaning yesterday, Martha continued undeterred. She pulled it from her apron pocket. Thomas in his dress uniform, standing tall and proud, his eyes bright with purpose and promise. So different from the haunted memory of his face that sometimes visited Emma's dreams. You should put that away, Emma said more sharply than intended. He would have made a fine husband. Well, he didn't get the chance, did he? Emma stood abruptly. He chose the military over staying here. Over me. Martha's eyes softened. That's not fair, Emma. Thomas believed in service, in protecting what he loved, and he died doing it. End of story. But it wasn't the end, not of the memories that Martha's words had unleashed. As Emma showered and changed for Richard's visit, the past washed over her in waves. Thomas and Emma had grown up on, Neighboring ranches, their friendship blossoming naturally into something deeper during high school. He'd been steady as the mountains, his laugh as warm as summer rain. They'd planned a future together, marriage after his first tour of duty, children who would grow up loving the land as they had. The night before he'd left for training, they'd sat on the ridge overlooking both their families' properties. The moon had bathed the valley in silver light. "I'll write every day," he'd promised, his voice rough with emotion. "You'd better." Emma had tried to sound light, though her heart felt leaden. Thomas had reached into his pocket, pulling out an antique silver medallion, a family heirloom passed down through generations of Blackwood men. A soaring eagle was embossed on one side, the Blackwood family crest on the other. "This has been carried by Blackwood men since the Civil War," he'd said, pressing it into her palm. "My great-grandfather gave it to his wife before he left to fight. She returned it when he came home. My grandfather carried it through World War II. His eyes had held hers. Keep it safe until I come back." Emma had worn it around her neck until the terrible day the officers had come to her door. Thomas's unit had been ambushed. There were no remains to recover. In her grief, Emma had insisted the medallion be buried in his empty casket, a final returning of his trust. The doorbell jolted Emma from her memories. Richard stood on the porch with a bottle of wine and a folder of documents. "You look beautiful," he said, his eyes warming as they took her in. The evening progressed pleasantly. Richard's proposal had evolved into concrete plans, and he'd brought the preliminary agreement for her review. Over dinner, he outlined the schedule for improvements, the expected return on investment, the protection of her ownership. Martha remained politely reserved, excusing herself early to give them privacy. As she left, Emma noticed her aunt placing Thomas's photograph back in the album shelf, carefully returning it to its place in the past. Later, as Richard spread the contract across the dining table, Emma found her mind drifting to Thomas's face in that military photo. So young, so certain. "Emma?" Richard's voice brought her back. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, sorry. Just memories." Richard's expression softened. "Martha mentioned your loss. Thomas, right?" Emma nodded, surprised by Martha's indiscretion. "It's hard to lose someone you love," Richard said, his hand covering hers. "My wife died 7 years ago. Cancer." The revelation startled Emma. "I didn't know you were married. It's not something I discuss often." His thumb stroked the back of her hand. "But I understand grief, how it changes you." In that moment, Richard's compassion breached a wall within Emma. Thomas had been her past, a beautiful, tragic past. But perhaps Richard could be her future. As the weeks passed, Richard became a fixture at Blackwood Ranch. His investment group began the promised improvements. The irrigation system was upgraded first, then the breeding program expanded. Emma found herself smiling more, laughing at Richard's city-slicker mistakes as he tried to learn ranching ways. 3 months into their partnership, Richard proposed during a sunset ride along the eastern ridge. The diamond ring caught the fading light, scattering rainbows across Emma's startled face. "I know it's fast," he admitted, "but at our age, why wait? We both know what we want." Emma thought briefly of Thomas, of promises made under similar skies, but that had been another life, another Emma. "Yes," she said, letting Richard slide the ring onto her finger. That night, Martha hugged her tightly, her happiness for Emma only slightly shadowed by caution. "He makes me happy, Martha," Emma assured her, "and he's saving the ranch." "I just want to be sure he loves you more than the land," Martha replied. "They're one and the same to me," Emma said. "Anyone who loves me has to love Blackwood too." Martha's eyes clouded briefly. "Thomas understood that." "Thomas is gone," Emma said firmly. "Richard is here, and he's given me a second chance at happiness." The Thornton Group's office in Helena impressed even the skeptical Martha. Clean lines, tasteful Western art, and floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing mountain views created an atmosphere of successful authenticity. Richard led Emma and Martha through glass doors into a conference room where a slender man in wire-rimmed glasses awaited. "James Cooper, my chief legal counsel," Richard introduced. "James handles all our partnership agreements." Cooper's handshake was brief, his smile professional. "Miss Harper, Mrs. Just Martha," Emma's aunt interjected. "I've prepared the final contract based on our discussions." Cooper slid a thick document across the polished table. "Everything we talked about is there. Capital improvements, profit, sharing, exit clauses." Emma opened the contract, Martha peering over her shoulder. The legalese was dense, but the key points seemed straightforward. The Thornton Group would invest $2 million in Blackwood Ranch improvements. In return, they'd receive 40% of profits for 5 years, after which Emma could buy out their interest at market value. Page 17 details the improvement schedule, Richard pointed out. Irrigation first, then breeding program, expansion, equipment upgrades, and finally the new North Pasture development. Emma nodded, remembering their discussions about each item. She flipped to the indicated page, noting the timeline matched what they'd agreed upon. "And my ownership?" Emma asked. "Fully protected," Cooper assured her. "The Thornton Group acquires no ownership interest in the land or fixed assets. We're strictly investors in the operation." Martha cleared her throat. "Mind if I review this more carefully?" Cooper's smile tightened slightly. "Of course, though I assure you, it's standard language for our partnerships." While Martha read, Richard guided Emma to the windows. "Once the papers are signed, we can start next week. Get everything in place." Before the wedding, Emma smiled at the mention of their upcoming ceremony. The engagement had been short by conventional standards, barely 2 months. But at their age, as Richard often said, why wait? The community had been surprised but supportive. Only Sheriff Mike Callahan had pulled Emma aside at the diner one morning, his weathered face concerned. "Known your family 30 years, Emma," he'd said. "Just want to be sure you're not rushing into anything." "I appreciate the concern, Mike," she'd replied, "but Richard is exactly what Blackwood needs, what I need." Now, watching Richard confidently discuss their future, Emma felt certain of her choice. He understood the land, respected her authority, and brought resources that would secure Blackwood's future. "Emma," Martha's voice broke through her thoughts. "Could you look at this section?" Emma returned to the table. Martha had the contract open to page 42, her finger underlining a paragraph in small print. "This seems to give them authority to act as your agent in certain circumstances," Martha said. Cooper leaned forward. "Standard language, I assure you. It simply allows us to handle routine transactions on behalf of the partnership, without bothering Miss Harper for every signature." "It's quite broad," Martha persisted. Richard placed a reassuring hand on Emma's shoulder. "James tends to be thorough, with legal protection, but I promise, every decision about Blackwood goes through you first." Emma studied the paragraph. The language was dense, but nothing seemed overtly concerning. Still, Martha's instincts were rarely wrong. "Could we modify this to specify what transactions you can handle independently?" Emma asked. A flash of something, annoyance, concern, crossed Cooper's face before his professional mask returned. "Certainly. I can redraft to enumerate specific authorities." "I'd appreciate that," Emma said. After the meeting, Martha remained quiet on the drive back to the ranch. Only when they turned onto the familiar dirt road did she speak. "Richard's charming, no doubt about that," Emma sighed. But this is moving awfully fast. The contract, the wedding. Are you sure, Emma?" The bank was ready to foreclose. "Martha, the Thornton Group is offering salvation at 40% of profits. 40% of something is better than 100% of nothing," Emma countered. "Besides, Richard isn't just a business partner anymore." Martha gazed out at the rolling pastures, the mountains beyond. "Your father always said to read every line of a contract twice, especially the small print. And I will, before signing anything final." In town the following day, Emma ran into Garrett Wilson, owner of the neighboring Silver Creek Ranch. His expression darkened when she mentioned her partnership with the Thornton Group. "Heard they've been buying up struggling places over in Cascade County," he said. "Ranches go into partnership, end up selling within a year or two." "That's not what Richard's proposing," Emma insisted. "They're investors, not buyers." Garrett shrugged. "Just sharing what I heard. Be careful, Emma. Once those city folks get their foot in the door..." The warning nagged at Emma as she drove home. She detoured to the county records office, spending an hour researching the Thornton Group's regional activities. Everything seemed legitimate. Several partnerships with ranches in neighboring counties, all structured similarly to what Richard had proposed. That evening, Richard arrived for dinner, bringing the revised contract. Cooper had narrowed the agency clause as requested, limiting the Thornton Group's independent authority to routine supply purchases under $5,000. "See? Nothing to worry about," Richard said, kissing Emma's cheek. "I want this to work for both of us." After dinner, they sat on the porch swing, watching stars emerge above the mountains. Richard's arm around her shoulders felt secure, his presence a comfort after years of handling everything alone. "4 weeks until the wedding," he murmured. "Having any second thoughts?" Emma thought of Martha's concerns, Garrett's warning, Sheriff Callahan's questions. Then she looked at the man beside her, successful, attentive, committed to her and to Blackwood. "Not a single one," she answered, meaning it despite the small voice of caution at the back of her mind. Richard smiled, pulling her closer. "Then, let's sign these papers tomorrow and start building our future." The old stone chapel glowed with late afternoon light, its stained glass windows casting jeweled patterns across the wooden pews. Emma stood in the small anteroom, Martha adjusting the simple lace veil over her upswept hair. "You look beautiful," Martha said, her eyes misty. "Your mother would be so proud." Emma smoothed the ivory satin of her dress, elegant and understated. At 35, she'd chosen something dignified rather than princess-like. "I keep thinking Dad should be here to walk me down the aisle." "He is, in his way." Martha pinned a small cameo brooch to Emma's bouquet, her mother's, worn at her own wedding decades ago. "Something old, something borrowed." Emma checked her watch. "Richard should be here by now." "Grooms are often late," Martha reassured her, though a flicker of something, concern, relief, crossed her weathered face. "Nerves get the best of them." Sheriff Callahan knocked softly before entering. In his dress uniform he looked distinguished despite his weathered features. He'd agreed to walk Emma down the aisle in her father's absence. "Ladies," he greeted them, "everything all right?" "Richard's running a bit late," Emma explained. Callahan checked his watch. 15 minutes, not unusual. Traffic from Helena can be unpredictable." Emma nodded, though unease rippled through her. Richard was never late. His punctuality was something she'd come to count on, a small but significant sign of his reliability. Another 10 minutes passed. The organist had cycled through her prelude selections twice. Guests shifted in their seats, whispers growing more audible. Emma's phone remained silent. No messages from Richard or his best man, James Cooper. "I'll try calling again," Sheriff Callahan offered, stepping outside. Martha squeezed Emma's hand. "I'm sure there's an explanation." When Callahan returned, his expression was carefully neutral. No answer from Richard. Cooper's phone goes straight to voicemail. The knot in Emma's stomach tightened. Something's wrong. Richard wouldn't just... "Let me check with the guests," Callahan suggested. "Maybe someone's heard something." Left alone with Martha, Emma paced the small room. "This doesn't make sense. Richard was fine yesterday, excited." Martha's silence spoke volumes. "Don't," Emma warned. "Don't say what you're thinking." "I haven't said a word," Martha replied quietly. The door opened again. Callahan returned with Pastor Matthews, both wearing grim expressions. "Emma," the pastor began gently, "perhaps we should make an announcement. Tell the guests there's been a delay Of what? I don't know anything. Emma's voice rose with frustration and embarrassment. The situation was becoming unbearable, standing in her wedding dress while her groom was inexplicably absent. A commotion from the chapel interrupted them. Raised voices, a woman's gasp, then heavy footsteps approaching the anteroom. The door swung open. Not Richard, not Cooper, but a stranger. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in weather-worn leather traveling clothes. His face bore a jagged scar. From right temple to jaw, his dark hair longer than military regulation, but still short enough to show the distinct shape of his head. But it was his eyes that arrested Emma. Intense, haunted, and achingly familiar, despite everything else that had changed. In his hand he clutched a silver medallion that caught the light. The room tilted. Emma heard Martha's sharp intake of breath, felt Callahan move protectively closer, but she couldn't look away from the impossible sight before her. Thomas. The name escaped her lips as a question, a prayer, a denial all at once. He stepped forward, his gaze never leaving hers. Emma. His voice was deeper than she remembered, roughened by whatever hell he'd survived. The bouquet slipped from Emma's numb fingers, scattering roses and baby's breath across the wooden floor. The cameo brooch clattered against the boards. "You're dead," she whispered. "We buried you. That medallion was in your casket." Thomas held it up, the eagle emblem catching the light. "I need to talk to you. It's about Richard." Sheriff Callahan found his voice first. "Son, you'd better explain yourself right quick." Thomas shifted his attention briefly to Callahan. Recognition, sparking. "Sheriff, I know how this looks, but Emma's in danger." He patted a worn leather satchel at his side. "I have proof. Richard Thornton isn't who he claims to be." Emma swayed, Martha's arm immediately around her waist for support. The room seemed to spin, her past and present colliding catastrophically. Her presumably dead first love standing before her, her absent fiancé apparently a fraud. "Thomas Blackwood is dead," she repeated, as if saying it again might restore order to her world. "We had a funeral, military honors. I was captured," Thomas said simply, "but I didn't die." His eyes held hers, pleading for belief. "And I've spent the last year tracking Richard Thornton's operation. He's done this before, Emma, multiple times." "Done what?" Martha asked sharply. Thomas's gaze remained fixed on Emma. "Targeted ranch owners, especially women, especially those with valuable land." He reached into his satchel. "And your wedding day isn't random. Today was when the final papers were to be signed, wasn't it?" The ground seemed to drop from beneath Emma's feet as the implications hit her. The absent groom, the contract's agency clause, the rushed wedding. "I think," she said faintly, "we need to talk." Pastor Matthews cleared the chapel with a gentle announcement about a family emergency, promising details soon. The guests departed reluctantly, their concerned whispers following them out into the afternoon sun. Only Sheriff Callahan, Martha, Emma and Thomas remained, gathered in the pastor's wood-paneled office. Emma sat rigidly in her wedding dress, staring at the man she'd mourned for 3 years. Thomas stood by the window, tension evident in every line of his body. The leather satchel rested on the desk between them, like a bomb waiting to detonate. "Start from the beginning," Sheriff Callahan instructed Thomas, "and make it convincing." Thomas nodded, his scarred face solemn. "Our unit was ambushed near the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. 3 killed immediately. I was captured with 2 others. His voice remained steady, though his eyes betrayed the horror of the memories. "They separated us. I never saw my men again." Emma's hands twisted in her lap, her engagement ring catching the light. "I was held for 18 months. Different locations, different groups. Eventually transferred to a compound run by extremists with," he hesitated, "with connections to certain international interests." "How did you escape?" Callahan asked. "Airstrike hit the compound. Chaos. I got out, made contact with local allies who hid me until extraction was possible." Thomas ran a hand through his hair. "Military debriefed me for months. When I finally got clearance to return to civilian life, I came looking for you, Emma." "That was what A year ago? Martha interjected. Why didn't you come straight here? Thomas's gaze returned to Emma. I did. But when I reached Pine Ridge, I overheard talk at the diner about Emma Harper's engagement to the businessman saving Blackwood Ranch. His jaw tightened. I recognized the pattern, needed to be sure before I showed up and turned your life upside down. Pattern? Emma finally spoke, her voice barely audible. Thomas opened the satchel, removing a folder. Richard Thornton isn't his real name. He's Richard Mercer. He's operated under at least 3 different identities in the last decade. He laid out newspaper clippings, photographs, documents. He targets land-rich, cash-poor operations, preferably owned by women, romances them, proposes partnership, then marriage. Emma stared at the evidence. Photos of Richard with different women, news items about ranch foreclosures. That doesn't prove anything criminal, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Thomas nodded. You're right, but this might. He produced copies of contracts, similar to the one Emma had nearly signed. These contain buried clauses. Once executed, they give his company power of attorney in exigent circumstances. After marriage, with commingled finances, he creates those circumstances. Sheriff Callahan examined the documents with growing concern. Financial engineering creates a crisis, triggers the clause, then liquidates assets before anyone realizes what's happening. By the time the authorities catch on, he's moved on. With a new identity, Thomas concluded. The money gets laundered through offshore accounts. Emma stood abruptly, the ivory satin of her dress rustling. I need air. Martha followed her into the hallway. For long moments they stood in silence, Emma staring unseeing at a painting of Christ as shepherd. Did you check the contract? Emma finally asked. Really check it? I tried, Martha said softly. But James Cooper is his accomplice, Thomas said, joining them with Callahan. Cooper handles the legal mechanics. He's the constant in all of Richard's operations. Emma's phone rang, startling them all. Richard's name flashed on the screen. With trembling fingers, she answered on speaker. Emma? God, I'm so sorry. Richard's voice sounded strained, desperate. There's been an accident on the highway. Cooper's hurt badly. We're at Helena Memorial. Emma met Thomas's eyes, seeing the confirmation of deception there. How terrible, she replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. Do they think he'll recover? A slight pause. Too early to tell. Look, I know this is awful timing. I've ruined our day, but can you come? I need you. Of course, Emma said. I'll leave right away. You're an angel. I'm so sorry, Emma. I love you. The call ended. Emma lowered the phone slowly. Helena Memorial has no record of any James Cooper being admitted today, Sheriff Callahan said quietly, his own phone in hand. I just checked. Emma closed her eyes. The final thread of doubt severed. When she opened them, her gaze was clear and focused. You said you have proof of what they're planning, Thomas nodded. And evidence connecting them to at least 3 other frauds in Wyoming and Idaho. Then let's go back to the ranch, Emma said, unpinning her veil with steady hands. I need to change, and then we need to plan. As they left the chapel, Emma paused, looking back at the altar where she'd waited for a man who had never intended to honor his vows. The flowers, the candles, the expectant atmosphere, all carefully orchestrated as part of an elaborate con. Thomas stood a respectful distance away, his presence solid and watchful. Not rushing her, not pushing, just there. For what it's worth, he said quietly. I'm sorry it happened this way. Emma straightened her shoulders. So am I, but it hasn't happened yet. Not really. She met his gaze directly. They don't know you're here. They don't know what we know. A slow smile spread across Thomas's scarred face, the first she'd seen since his impossible return. No, he agreed. They don't. Back at Blackwood Ranch, Emma emerged from her bedroom in jeans and a flannel shirt, her wedding dress discarded on the bed like a deflated dream. She'd scrubbed her face clean of makeup, pulled her hair into a practical ponytail, and replaced the diamond engagement ring with her father's worn signet ring. In the living room, Sheriff Callahan spread Thomas's documents across the coffee table. His badge caught the lamplight as he leaned forward, methodically organizing the evidence. 5 cases that match Richard's pattern, he summarized. Different names, same approach, always targeting valuable land with cash-poor owners. Martha set down a tray of coffee mugs. But how does he profit? Emma hasn't signed anything giving him ownership. Not directly, Thomas explained, accepting a mug with a nod of thanks. But the partnership agreement has clauses that, when triggered, would allow the Thornton Group to act as Emma's agent in emergency situations. Emma picked up one of the contracts. Page 42, the clause Martha questioned, which Cooper modified when you raised concerns, Thomas noted. But there are other provisions scattered throughout. Once combined with marriage and commingled finances, they create a perfect storm. Emma's face hardened. So he gains control, then what? Forces a sale. Creates a financial crisis first, Thomas replied. Usually by diverting funds or taking on unauthorized debt. When the operation can't meet obligations, the emergency clause kicks in and the Thornton Group steps in to solve the problem by selling assets, Callahan concluded. By the time the victim understands what's happening, the money's gone offshore. Martha squeezed Emma's shoulder. Thank God you found out before marrying him. Emma stared at a photograph of Richard, or Richard Mercer apparently, with another woman, an older rancher with kind eyes and silver hair. What happened to these other women? 3 lost everything, Thomas said quietly. 1 managed to salvage her house, but lost the ranch. The most recent, Laura Simmons in Wyoming, got lucky. Richard abandoned the operation when he caught wind of an investigation. We should contact her, Callahan said, pulling out his phone. Compare notes. While the sheriff made his call, Emma studied Thomas. In the warm light of her family home, she could better see the changes in him. The scar was the most obvious. But there were other differences, a watchfulness in his eyes, a controlled stillness in his movements, a gravity that hadn't been there before. War and captivity had hardened the boy she'd known into this cautious, deliberate man. How long have you been tracking him, she asked. 8 months, Thomas replied. After I saw you with him in town, I did some digging. His pattern seemed familiar from intelligence work I'd done. Started connecting dots. You could have approached me. His expression softened slightly. I considered it. But you seemed happy. Emma? And I wasn't sure of Richard's game yet. Didn't want to disrupt your life based on suspicion. So you waited until my wedding day. A hint of her earlier anger resurfaced. Thomas held her gaze steadily. I only confirmed the connection to previous frauds yesterday. Found the link between Cooper and the Wyoming case. Sheriff Callahan rejoined them, ending the tense moment. Laura Simmons is willing to talk. Says she's been working with FBI financial crimes, but they haven't moved yet. Not enough evidence for charges. What about Richard's call? Martha asked. He's expecting Emma at the hospital. He'll figure out soon enough that she's not coming. Thomas said, then he'll try another approach. I should call him, Emma decided. Pretend I'm delayed but still in the dark. Buy us time. Callahan nodded. Good idea. Keep it brief, though. These types are skilled at detecting deception. Emma's call to Richard was a masterpiece of controlled emotion. She explained that her car had broken down, that she'd get to the hospital as soon as possible, that she was still in her wedding dress with no way to change. Richard's response was solicitous, concerned, exactly what a loving fiancé should say. You're quite the actress, Thomas observed after she hung up. I had a good teacher, Emma replied flatly. 4 months with Richard Mercer. As evening approached, they formulated a plan. Emma would maintain the pretense of ignorance, while Sheriff Callahan quietly built a case. Thomas would stay out of sight, monitoring the ranch from the old hunting cabin on the property's edge. I don't want him within 5 miles of this house, Emma insisted, when Thomas suggested he could better protect her from closer quarters. Thomas's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Fair enough. I've imposed enough as it is. Martha walked him to the doctor while Callahan made arrangements to place a deputy near the property entrance. She needs time, Martha told Thomas quietly. Finding out Richard is a fraud and you're alive, all on her wedding day. I understand, Thomas replied. I'm not here to complicate her life, Martha, just to help clean up this mess. And after? Martha's shrewd eyes studied him. Thomas looked back toward the living room, where Emma sat with Callahan, her posture rigid with contained fury. That's not for me to decide. As darkness fell over Blackwood Ranch, Emma stood on the porch watching. Thomas's truck disappeared down the long driveway. The same view she'd admired that morning as a bride-to-be, now seen through entirely different eyes. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Cooper stabilized. Staying at hospital tonight. Call when you can. Love you. Emma slipped the phone into her pocket without responding, her gaze drawn to the distant mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky. The land remained constant while everything else had shifted beneath her feet. We'll get through this, Martha said, joining her. We always do. Emma nodded, her hand finding the porch railing, solid, weathered oak that had supported 3 generations of her family. They picked the wrong woman to con. Morning sunlight streamed through the ranch house windows as Emma spread bank statements across the kitchen table. Martha stood at the stove, the familiar scent of coffee and bacon providing a veneer of normalcy to a day that was anything but. Found something, Emma said, tapping a statement from 2 months prior. $5,000 transferred from the ranch operating account to TG Consulting. The Thornton Group? Martha asked, bringing over coffee. Maybe, Emma frowned, but I never authorized this payment. She pulled out her laptop, accessing the online banking portal. The transaction history revealed more. Small withdrawals and transfers, none large. Enough to trigger her immediate concern, but adding up to nearly $30,000 over 3 months. He had account access as part of the partnership, Emma realized, said it was necessary for implementing the improvements. Martha's expression darkened. The money for the new irrigation system, which is only half installed. Emma massaged her temples. I trusted him completely. The crunch of tires on gravel announced Sheriff Callahan's arrival. He entered without knocking, his weathered face grave beneath his badge. Morning, ladies. Any contact from Richard? 2 voicemails asking why I never showed up at the hospital, Emma replied. I texted that my truck broke down completely and I was dealing with a ranch emergency. He's on his way back from Helena now. Callahan nodded. Good. Gives us time. He laid a folder on the table, ran background on Cooper. Real name James Cooper, but he's operated under various legal aliases. IBAR memberships in 3 states, suspended in 2 for ethics violations. And Richard hired him anyway, Martha noted. Birds of a feather, Callahan replied. Got preliminary financials on the Thornton Group too. Shell corporations, multiple layers, classic money laundering structure. Emma pointed to her bank statements. Found unauthorized transfers, nearly 30,000 missing. The sheriff examined the transactions, testing the waters, seeing if you'd notice. I didn't, Emma admitted, shame coloring her voice. Don't. Blame yourself, Martha said firmly. You trusted your fiancé. Any woman would. Not any woman, came a new voice. Thomas stood in the doorway, his tall frame nearly filling it. Laura Simmons noticed similar discrepancies. That's what saved her ranch. Emma stiffened. I thought you were staying at the cabin. Saw Richard's car heading this way. Thought you should know. Callahan checked his sidearm reflexively. How far? About 10 minutes out, driving slow, like he's thinking. Emma rose, suddenly conscious of her rumpled appearance. Her hair was still in yesterday's ponytail, her eyes shadowed from a sleepless night. I need to look normal, like nothing's wrong. While she hurried to change, Thomas briefed Callahan on his conversation with Laura Simmons. She's emailing documentation of how they manipulated her accounts. Should arrive this morning. Martha studied him over her coffee cup. You've been thorough. Thomas met her gaze. I protect what I care about. Emma returned wearing fresh jeans and a blue chambray shirt, her hair brushed and face composed. Sheriff, you should go. Richard can't know we're investigating. I'll be at the station. Call if you need anything. Callahan squeezed her shoulder. Deputy Miller's watching the main road. One call and we'll be here. After the sheriff departed, Emma turned to Thomas. You need to go too. Emma, if Richard sees you, everything falls apart. We need him to think I'm still in the dark. Thomas's jaw tightened, but he nodded. I'll be watching from the ridge. Signal if you need me. 3 quick flashes with the porch light. When he'd gone, Martha touched Emma's arm. Are you sure about this? Facing him alone? I've dealt with ornery bulls and stubborn bankers, Emma replied, steel beneath her calm tone. I can handle Richard Mercer for 1 more day. Richard arrived looking appropriately haggard, tie loosened, designer stubble darkening his jaw. His performance of the concerned fiancé was flawless, gathering Emma into an embrace that once would have comforted her. I was so worried, he murmured into her hair. When you didn't show up or answer calls, Emma returned the embrace with just enough stiffness to suggest lingering hurt. I thought my wedding day would be different, she said, pulling away. How's James? Stabilized. Richard ran a hand through his artfully disheveled hair. Doctors are keeping him for observation. Car hit a guardrail. He's lucky to be alive. Emma nodded, cataloguing the lies. Coffee? In the kitchen, Richard launched into elaborate apologies while Emma poured mugs for them both. Martha had conveniently disappeared to check on the chickens. We can reschedule everything, Richard assured her. Maybe a smaller ceremony, just us and close friends. What about the partnership paperwork? Emma asked, careful to keep her tone neutral. Wasn't that supposed to be finalized yesterday too? Something flickered in Richard's eyes, calculation quickly masked by affection. That can wait. You're more important than business. Emma sipped her coffee, hiding her disgust behind the mug. How had she missed the predatory nature beneath his charm? The way his eyes constantly assessed, measured, calculated. Actually, she said, I'd like to move forward with the partnership. The ranch needs those improvements, wedding or not. Richard's smile widened. Of course, you're right. I can have James bring the papers by tomorrow, assuming he's released. Perfect. Emma forced warmth into her smile. And the wedding, maybe next weekend. Something simple. Whatever you want, darling. Richard squeezed her hand across the table, his expensive watch catching the light. I just want to make you happy. An hour later, after Richard left with promises to return for dinner, Emma stood on the porch, watching his car disappear down the long driveway. Martha joined her, silent support against the autumn breeze. You were convincing, Martha finally said. I learned from the best. Emma's voice was bitter. 4 months of watching a master manipulator at work. From the distant ridge, a flash of light, Thomas signaling that Richard had cleared the property. Emma straightened her shoulders, the gentle bride-to-be persona falling away like a discarded coat. Now, she said, let's see what else he's been hiding. Dusk settled over Blackwood Ranch, the mountains purpling against the fading sky. Emma sat on the porch steps, a manila folder in her lap containing Laura Simmons' emailed documents. The woman's experience read like a blueprint for what Richard had planned for Emma. Partnership, romance, marriage, then systematic financial. Dismantling of her operation. The crunch of boots on gravel announced Thomas's approach. He moved with military precision, his outline unmistakable even in the gathering shadows. Richard's gone, he asked, stopping at the bottom of the steps. Emma nodded. Left about an hour ago. Coming back for dinner tomorrow. Thomas remained standing, maintaining a careful distance. The space between them seemed filled with unspoken words, with 3 years of absence and presumed death. Martha went to bed early, Emma said finally. Said the excitement was too much for her. She's stronger than she lets on. Always has been. Emma hesitated, then gestured to the step beside her. You should sit. We need to talk. Thomas lowered himself onto the step, his movements revealing a slight stiffness on his left side. They sat in silence for a moment, The familiar nighttime sounds of the ranch surrounding them, crickets, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft nickering of horses in the barn. "You didn't die," Emma said finally. "Direct, unvarnished." "No." Thomas's voice was quiet. "But there were days I wished I had." "Tell me," she said. "Everything." Thomas gazed out at the darkening land, gathering his thoughts. "Our unit was escorting a diplomatic convoy. Ambush hit us hard, coordinated, professional, not typical insurgents." His hands clasped together, knuckles whitening. "They knew exactly who we were, what our protocols were. Someone sold us out." Emma listened silently, giving him space to unfold the story at his own pace. "3 of our team died immediately, Mason, Diaz, and Reeves. The names came with weight, with honor. Henderson and I were captured. They separated us at the first camp, never saw him again. A coyote called in the distance, its lonely howl echoing across the valley. 18 months in various compounds, interrogations, isolation." His voice remained steady, factual, though Emma could sense the horrors hidden beneath the simple words. "Eventually ended up in a compound run by a group with connections to private military contractors, mercenaries playing both sides of the conflict." "How did you escape?" Emma asked when he paused. "Airstrike hit the compound. Not sure if it was ours or theirs. Chaos either way. I got out, made contact with local allies. Spent weeks moving through the mountains before reaching a forward operating base." His hand unconsciously touched the scar on his face. "Took months of surgeries, debriefing, physical therapy. Military kept everything classified. I was officially dead, and they weren't eager to correct the record immediately." Emma absorbed this, connecting the timeline with her own grief, her gradual acceptance of his death, her eventual openness to Richard. "When they finally released me to civilian life, I came looking for you." Thomas turned to face her directly. "Found you engaged to Richard. Why didn't you approach me then?" Something felt off about him. Too polished, too perfect. Thomas's gaze was steady. "I'd seen that type before, men who could charm their way past any security, and I didn't want to disrupt your life based on just a feeling." "So you investigated him?" Thomas nodded. "Used contacts from my intelligence work. Started connecting him to other cases. Found Laura Simmons in Wyoming. By the time I had solid proof, your wedding was days away." Emma looked down at her hands, at the pale band of skin where Richard's diamond had rested until yesterday. "I grieved for you, Thomas. For years, I visited your empty grave every month with flowers." "I know." His voice softened. "I saw you there once, after I returned. Wanted to approach you then, but what? You were praying, saying goodbye, telling me you were finally moving on." His eyes held remembered pain. "It felt wrong to interrupt that moment, to force myself back into your life when you'd found peace." Emma felt tears threatening. "So instead, you watched from a distance while I fell for a conman." "I watched to make sure you were safe," he corrected gently. "And when I realized you weren't, I intervened." They sat in silence again, the weight of all that had happened, and all that might have been, settling between them like an invisible presence. "The Thomas I knew died 3 years ago," Emma said finally. "The man sitting here now, I don't know him." "That's fair." Thomas's acceptance held no self-pity, just acknowledgement. "I'm not the same person who left. Couldn't be after everything." Emma studied his profile, the familiar shape of his jaw now marred by the scar, the same strong shoulders now carrying invisible burdens. "What's your plan after this?" she asked. "After we deal with Richard?" Thomas's gaze returned to the distant mountains. "Hadn't thought that far ahead. Been focused on stopping him, protecting you and the ranch, but not staying. It wasn't a question. That would be presumptuous." His voice was careful, measured. "You have a life here, Emma. I'm just passing through it again." Emma stood, needing physical distance from the emotions his presence evoked. "It's late. You should get back to the cabin before it's fully dark." Thomas rose, respecting her unspoken need for space. "Sheriff Callahan's deputy will watch the main road tonight. I'll keep an eye on the North Ridge. Thank you. Emma wrapped her arms around herself against the evening chill. For everything. As Thomas walked away, his silhouette melding with the gathering darkness, Emma remained on the porch. The man who had returned was both familiar and unknown, carrying her past with him like a ghost between them. She touched the empty space on her finger, where 2 rings had rested at different times in her life. Thomas's medallion, worn on a chain until news of his death, and Richard's diamond, now locked in a drawer. Both symbols of promises, one broken by fate, one by deception. Tomorrow she would face Richard again, maintain the pretense, gather more evidence. But tonight, alone with the stars emerging above her family's land, Emma allowed herself to acknowledge the truth that complicated everything. Beneath her anger and confusion, some part of her heart had recognized Thomas Blackwood the moment he walked into that chapel. Sheriff Callahan arrived early the next morning, his cruiser kicking up dust along the ranch driveway. Emma met him on the porch, coffee in hand, tension evident in the set of her shoulders. "Found something interesting," Callahan said without preamble, handing her a thin folder. "State business filings for the Thornton Group." Emma opened it, scanning the documents. These list Richard as CEO, but she frowned at the name in the ownership section. Victor Crane, who's that? Major real estate developer out of Seattle, specializes in luxury resorts. Callahan accepted the coffee Martha brought out. "Been buying up properties all through this valley." "Why use Richard as a front man?" Martha asked. "Crane's notorious for aggressive acquisitions. Been sued multiple times for shady tactics." Callahan sipped his coffee. "Using Richard and his charm offensive lets him stay at arm's length from the dirty work." Emma recalled conversations with Richard about modernizing the ranch, suggestions of potential recreational uses for the northern section with its pristine creek and mountain views. What she'd taken for visionary thinking now revealed itself as calculated groundwork. "So it's not just about my ranch," Emma said. "It's about developing the entire region." "Looks that way." Callahan nodded grimly. "Your property's key. Controls. Water rights for half the valley, has the best access road to the high country." Thomas emerged from the tree line, approaching with quick strides. His expression telegraphed trouble before he reached the porch. "Someone was at the cabin last night," he reported. "Found footprints this morning, signs of the window being jimmied." Callahan straightened. "Anything missing?" "My research." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Files on Richard and Cooper. Backup drive with evidence?" Emma's blood ran cold. "How would they know about the cabin?" "Richard's been here for months," Martha reminded them. "Plenty of time to explore every inch of the property. Or he has someone local feeding him information." Callahan added. The implication hung heavy. Someone in Pine Ridge, someone Emma knew and trusted, could be working with Richard. Thomas pulled a crumpled paper from his pocket. "Found this tacked to the cabin door." Emma unfolded it, reading aloud. "Back off while you still can. Some things should stay buried." The threat sent a chill through her despite the morning sun. "They know you're alive. And they're letting us know they're watching," Thomas added. "This wasn't a random break-in." Callahan took the note, careful to touch only the edges. "I'll dust for prints, but don't expect much. These guys are professionals." Emma paced the porch, mind racing. "Richard's coming for dinner tonight. Cooper's. Supposedly still in the hospital. If they know about Thomas, my cover's blown." "Not necessarily," Thomas countered. "The note was at the cabin, not the house. They might suspect someone's investigating, but not that you're involved." "So I maintain the charade," Emma concluded. "Keep Richard close, keep him talking." Callahan looked uneasy. "These types get dangerous when cornered, which is why we need more evidence before moving against them." Emma's voice hardened with resolve. "The partnership documents. Richard said Cooper would bring them tomorrow. That's our chance to catch them red-handed." "Too risky," Thomas objected. "You'd be signing your ranch away." "Not if we make some modifications first," Emma countered, a plan forming. "Sheriff, if I mark the documents before signing, would that help prove fraud?" Callahan considered. Invisible ink notations, specific misspellings you can identify later. Yes, that could work. But Emma, these men aren't amateurs. Neither am I. Her gaze swept over the land that had been her family's for generations. And they picked the wrong ranch to target. They spent the morning implementing security measures. Thomas installed motion sensors borrowed from Callahan at key approaches to the house. Martha moved valuables and important documents to a neighbor's property for safekeeping. Emma prepared for her performance that evening, rehearsing questions that might elicit revealing responses from Richard. By afternoon, dark clouds gathered over the mountains, matching the tension building at Blackwood Ranch. Thomas prepared to return to his surveillance position on the ridge, packing supplies into a weatherproof bag. "I don't like leaving you alone with him," he told Emma as they stood by his truck. "Martha will be here, and Callahan's deputy is watching the main road." Thomas hesitated, then reached into his pocket. "Take this." He pressed a small object into her palm, a panic button linked to his phone. "One press. I'll be here in minutes." Emma closed her fingers around it, oddly moved by the gesture. "I can handle Richard." "I know you can." Thomas's scarred face softened momentarily. "Just because you can face something alone doesn't mean you have to." As he drove away, Emma felt the weight of the panic button in her hand, small but significant, like the renewed connection between them. Complex emotions she had no time to examine. In the house, she found Martha laying out her best tablecloth, preparing for Richard's visit with grim determination. "You don't have to do this," Emma said. "If you're facing that snake, you're not doing it with everyday dishes." Martha straightened a fork with military precision. "Your mother would haunt me." Emma smiled despite everything, grateful for her aunt's practical courage. As she helped with dinner preparations, a movement caught her eye, a flash of something at the tree line, too quick to identify. Watching, waiting. The sense of being hunted on her own land sent anger coursing through her veins, burning away. Uncertainty. "Let them come," she thought, slipping the panic button into her pocket. "This ends now." Richard arrived precisely at 7, his Range Rover gleaming despite the light rain that had begun to fall. He carried wine and flowers, ever the perfect gentleman, and greeted Emma with a kiss that she forced herself to return. "You look beautiful," he said, his eyes warm with what once would have seemed like genuine affection. Now Emma could see the calculation behind the charm, the performance behind the smile. "Dinner's almost ready," she replied, leading him into the dining room where Martha had prepared a roast with all the trimmings. "Martha, this looks incredible," Richard complimented, helping Emma with her chair. "Hospital food has been abysmal. How James is supposed to recover on that slop, I'll never know." "How is he?" Emma asked, serving Richard a generous portion of roast beef. "Any word on when he'll be released?" "Doctors say tomorrow, barring complications." Richard sampled the wine he'd brought. "He's eager to get those partnership papers to you. Mentioned it 3 times today." Emma forced a smile. "I'm eager too. The sooner we formalize everything, the sooner the ranch improvements can continue." Richard's eyes lit with barely concealed triumph. "Exactly. No reason to let one delayed wedding derail all our plans." As they ate, Emma carefully steered the conversation toward Richard's business history. "You mentioned projects in Wyoming. Any near Jackson? I have a cousin there." "A few ventures," Richard answered smoothly. "Nothing major. Mostly consulting." "Work." The lie slid easily from his lips. According to Laura Simmons's documents, Richard had operated extensively in Jackson, using the name Richard Taylor during a nearly identical scheme. "And before Wyoming?" Emma pressed gently. "Seattle, right?" "Born and raised," Richard confirmed, though Thomas's research showed he'd grown up in Chicago as Richard Mercer. "Started the Thornton Group there about 10 years ago." Each fabrication strengthened Emma's resolve. Throughout dinner, she maintained her role as the adoring fiancé while mentally cataloguing every deception. Martha provided perfect support, her normally forthright manner subdued into polite interest. After dessert, Richard suggested a walk to the porch to watch the rain. Emma acquiesced, knowing the more comfortable he felt, the more likely he was to reveal something useful. On the covered porch, Richard pulled her close, ostensibly for warmth. "I've been thinking about the wedding," he murmured. "What if we make it a civil ceremony? This weekend. Just us." Emma's pulse quickened at the accelerated timeline. "So soon? What about our guests?" "We'll have a reception later." His fingers traced her arm possessively. "But the legal part, I don't want to wait. After everything that's happened, I just want you to be my wife." "After everything that's happened, you're getting desperate," Emma thought. "What about James and the partnership papers?" she asked. "Shouldn't we handle that first?" "We could do both same day," Richard suggested, his tone casual, though his eyes sharpened. "Sign the papers in the morning, get married in the afternoon. Start our life together with everything in order." Emma turned, as if considering the proposal, using the moment to collect herself. The rain had intensified, drumming on the porch roof, and obscuring the view of the ridge where Thomas kept watch. "It's tempting," she admitted, turning back to Richard, "but I'd like to review the final contract thoroughly this time. After all, it's our future." Something flashed in Richard's eyes. Frustration quickly masked. "Of course, James will bring it first thing tomorrow." The conversation drifted to safer topics, but Emma sensed a new tension in Richard. His charm remained impeccable, but underneath, she detected impatience, calculation, reassessment of his approach. As they returned inside, Richard paused at a photograph on the hallway table. Emma's father, standing proudly on the north ridge of the property. "Beautiful view," Richard commented. "That's where you want to put the new fence line, right?" "Eventually," Emma agreed, though she'd never discussed fencing that area with him. "The survey maps in your father's study show it as ideal grazing land," Richard continued, confirming Emma's suspicion that he'd been exploring her home uninvited. "Add some financial irregularities we've carefully established in your accounts, and foreclosure becomes inevitable. Either way, Blackwood Ranch will be ours." "The choice, Ms. Harper," Crane said smoothly, "is whether you benefit from the transition or become its victim." Emma's fingers closed around the panic button in her pocket. Whatever had happened in the barn, she had to believe Thomas was still alive, still fighting. She needed to buy time. "I want to see these transfer documents," she said, "and this supposed historical claim." Cooper nodded to Richard, who retrieved papers from his briefcase. As they spread the documents on the table, Emma pressed the panic button, praying the signal would reach its destination. "This settlement offer is more than generous," Crane pointed out as Emma examined the papers. $5 million, relocation assistance, and a complete release of liability. "For a ranch worth $50 million with the water rights," Emma countered, stalling. Cooper's patience visibly thinned. "The historical context changes the valuation considerably. Sign the papers, Emma. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "I need to consult with my attorney," she insisted. "No reasonable person would sign this immediately." "Your reasonableness expired when you involved Thomas Blackwood in our business," Cooper snapped. "Did you think we wouldn't notice him investigating us, following Richard, contacting our previous clients?" Martha edged closer to Emma, her expression resolute. "How exactly do you plan to explain taking our land by force?" "People will ask questions." "Tragic accident," Richard supplied smoothly. "Faulty wiring led to a devastating house fire. By the time emergency services arrived, nothing could be done." The clinical way he outlined their planned deaths sent ice through Emma's veins. These men had rehearsed this scenario, had contingencies prepared for every resistance. "You won't get away with this," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Sheriff Callahan knows everything." "Sheriff Callahan," Cooper replied with a cold smile, "is currently responding to an emergency on the other side of the county. By The time he returns, this will all be over. A subtle vibration from Emma's pocket, the panic button receiving a response. Her heart leapt. Thomas was alive. But whatever hope that knowledge provided was tempered by the 4 men surrounding them, the documents demanding her signature, and the clear intention in Cooper's eyes. She was out of time. Emma stared at the transfer documents, mind racing for a solution. Cooper and his men controlled the house. Thomas was unaccounted for despite responding to her panic signal, and Sheriff Callahan had been deliberately misdirected. The walls were closing in. "You have 5 minutes to decide," Crane announced, checking his Rolex. "Sign voluntarily, or we proceed with the alternative scenario." Martha's hand found Emma's beneath the table, a silent gesture of solidarity. In that touch, Emma felt generations of Harper resilience, the same determination that had helped her ancestors survive droughts, blizzards, economic downturns, and personal tragedies. "I need to use the restroom," Emma said suddenly. Cooper frowned. "This isn't the time for delays. It's the time for basic human dignity," she countered, "unless you plan to add physical cruelty to your list of crimes." After a tense moment, Cooper nodded to Richard. "Escort her. 2 minutes." Richard followed Emma down the hallway, maintaining a careful distance. When they reached the bathroom door, Emma turned to face him. "Was any of it real?" she asked quietly. "Any moment in the last 4 months?" Something complicated passed across Richard's handsome features. "Parts," he admitted, "more than there should have been." "Then help us," Emma urged. "This isn't just business anymore. Cooper's talking about murder." Richard glanced back toward the living room. "It's too late. Cooper won't stop, and Crane has. Too much invested. The resort plans are already in motion." "There's always a choice, Richard." His expression hardened. "Not for me. Not anymore." He gestured to the bathroom door. 1 minute. Inside the small powder room, Emma moved quickly. Her true purpose wasn't a bathroom break, but access to her father's study, directly adjacent, connected by a hidden door behind the vanity, a Prohibition-era feature her grandfather had shown her as a child. She slid the vanity aside silently, revealing the narrow passage. Squeezing through, she entered the study where generations of Harpers had managed ranch business. In the bottom drawer of her father's desk lay what she sought, an old leather-bound book and a faded map, yellow with age. Her grandfather's stories came back to her, tales of bootleggers using the ranch during Prohibition, of hidden tunnels and secret rooms that had helped smuggle liquor across county lines. As a child, she'd thought them exaggerated yarns. As an adult, she'd discovered they were history. Emma quickly photographed the tunnel map with her phone, then sent the images to Thomas with a text. "Tunnels under the house. North entrance behind fallen oak at Creek Bend. South entrance en route." Isella, the response came immediately. "Alive." 2 men down, sheriff notified. "Hold on." Relief flooded her at confirmation Thomas had survived. She returned the book and map to their hiding place, then slipped back through the hidden door, carefully repositioning the vanity. When she emerged from the bathroom, Richard was waiting impatiently. "Time's up." "I'm ready," Emma said with newfound resolve. In the living room, Cooper and Crane were engaged in tense conversation while their hired men watched the windows. Martha remained seated, her expression giving nothing away. "Decision time, Miss Harper," Crane announced as Emma returned. "The papers or the fire. Choose wisely." Emma stepped to the window, gazing out at her land, the rolling pastures, the distant mountains, the creek that had sustained Blackwood cattle for generations. The same view her father had loved, and his father before him. "This land has been in my family for nearly 150 years, she said finally. "We've endured worse threats than you." Cooper's patience visibly evaporated. "Enough theatrics. Sign or suffer. The consequences." "I'll sign," Emma said, turning back to face them, "but only after I show you something, a gesture of good faith." Suspicion flashed in Cooper's eyes. What kind of something? Documentation that might interest you. Historical papers from my family's archives. Emma met his gaze steadily. About the original land dispute with your family. The bait worked. Cooper's composure slipped, revealing the obsession beneath his professional veneer. Where are these documents? In my father's study. Emma gestured down the hall. I can show you. After a moment's hesitation, Cooper nodded. Lead the way. Richard, come with us. To the hired men he added, watch the old woman, first sign of trouble, shoot her. Martha's expression remained impassive, though Emma caught the slight nod between them, a signal they'd established earlier. Martha understood the plan. The study was exactly as Emma had left it. Leather-bound books lining the walls, her father's massive oak desk dominating the space. Family photographs chronicled generations of Harpers, while a rifle hung in a display case, her great-grandfather's Winchester maintained in working condition as family tradition dictated. The documents are in the safe, Emma explained, moving to a painting of Blackwood's North Ridge. She swung it aside, revealing an old wall safe with a combination dial. Cooper watched intently as she turned the dial. Right to 18, left to 79, right to 42. The safe clicked open. These papers establish the legitimate chain of title, Emma explained, removing a folder, including documentation of the payment your ancestor received. Payment? Cooper's composure cracked. There was no payment. The land was stolen. According to your family history, Emma countered. Mine tells a different story. As Cooper reached for the folder, a subtle vibration from Emma's phone confirmed Thomas's text. In position. Root cellar clear. Await signal. Emma handed Cooper the folder. See for yourself. While he was distracted examining the contents, Emma edged toward her father's desk, positioning herself near the hidden drawer that contained a small backup revolver. Martha had insisted she keep it there after a rabid coyote had approached the house last spring. Cooper leafed through the documents, his expression darkening. These are forgeries, more Harper deception. They're certified territorial records, Emma replied. Judge Wilkins authenticated them in 1882. Wilkins was in your great-grandfather's pocket, Cooper snarled. My family documented everything, the corruption, the threats, the stolen legacy. Emma noticed Richard's discomfort growing as Cooper's controlled facade continued to crack, revealing the obsession beneath. This wasn't just business for Cooper. It was personal vengeance wrapped in corporate paperwork. Even if you're right about the past, Emma said carefully, how does that justify what you're doing now? The fraud, the threats, planning our deaths. Justice, Cooper replied, the word sharp as a blade. My family spent generations watching yours prosper on stolen land. I'm simply reclaiming what's rightfully ours, while murdering innocent people. Collateral damage in a war your family started. Emma shifted slightly, gauging the distance to the desk drawer. And Richard? Crane? Where do they fit in your revenge story? Useful tools, Cooper said dismissively. Richard has the charm I lack, the face people trust. Crane has the resources to develop the land properly. Richard stiffened. We're partners, James. Cooper's laugh held no humor. You're an employee, Richard. A convincing actor I hired to play a part. The revelation hung in the air. Richard's expression hardened as he absorbed the truth of his position. What happens to Richard after this? Emma pressed, sensing the fracture between them. Once the land is secured and the resort development begins, Cooper shrugged. He'll be compensated as agreed, then he'll disappear, establish a new identity for the next operation. And if authorities start asking questions about Emma Harper's tragic death, Emma continued, who becomes the convenient scapegoat? Understanding dawned in Richard's eyes. You wouldn't. It's already arranged, Cooper replied coldly. The evidence will show Richard Thornton became obsessed with his fiancé, grew violent when she tried to end the relationship. Richard paled. That wasn't our agreement. Agreements change. Cooper's attention returned to the documents, dismissing Richard's concerns. Emma caught Richard's eye, silently communicating the betrayal they now shared. Whatever his sins, Richard had been manipulated just as she had. Different methods, same puppet master. The moment was interrupted by a distant thud from elsewhere in the house, followed by Martha's raised voice. Cooper looked up sharply. "Check that," he ordered Richard. As Richard left the study, Emma sent the signal text to Thomas. "Now." Cooper returned the documents to the folder. "These changed nothing. The transfer papers await your signature. And if I still refuse? Then the tragic fire claims 3 victims instead of 2. Cooper withdrew his pistol. "Your stubbornness has cost you any chance of walking away with compensation." A sudden commotion erupted from the living room. Shouts, a crash, the sound of breaking glass. Cooper stepped toward the door, gun raised, momentarily distracted. Emma lunged for the desk drawer, yanking it open and grabbing her father's revolver in one fluid motion. Years of ranch life had made her proficient with firearms. Necessary for predator control and livestock protection. "Drop it," she commanded, aiming at Cooper. He turned back, his own weapon still raised. "You won't shoot me, Emma. Not in cold blood. To protect my home and family? Watch me." They faced each other. Across the study, guns leveled, wills locked in combat. Through the open door came sounds of struggle. Thomas had entered through the tunnels, engaging the hired muscle. "It's over, Cooper," Emma said. "Sheriff Callahan is on his way. Thomas is alive. Your operation is blown. Nothing's over while I'm still standing," Cooper replied, his finger tightening on the trigger. The standoff was broken by Richard's unexpected return. He appeared in the doorway, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. "Thomas Blackwood's in the house," he reported tersely, "with friends." Cooper's attention wavered for a split second, enough for Emma to step sideways, putting the heavy desk between them. Cooper fired, the bullet splintering the wood where she'd stood a moment before. Emma returned fire, her shot going wide as Cooper ducked behind a bookcase. Richard flattened himself against the wall as bullets splintered the century-old books. "This ends now," Cooper shouted, desperation edging his voice. "One way or another, Blackwood Ranch burns today." The firefight had begun. And somewhere in the house, Thomas was fighting his way toward them. Gunfire echoed through the ranch house as Emma crouched behind her father's desk, the solid oak offering temporary protection. Cooper remained behind the bookcase, occasionally, firing shots that splintered wood and shattered the framed photographs on the walls. Richard had disappeared from the doorway, his allegiance uncertain. In the main part of the house, the sounds of struggle continued. Furniture crashing, men shouting, the dull impact of hand-to-hand combat. Thomas was alive and fighting, but Emma couldn't count on immediate rescue. "You're surrounded, Cooper," she called out, checking the revolver's remaining bullets. "Sheriff Callahan will be here any minute." "Police response time out here is 40 minutes, Cooper responded, his voice controlled despite the chaos. "Plenty of time to finish this and be gone." Emma's gaze landed on her father's rifle in its display case, a Winchester lever action, maintained in working condition and loaded with ammunition in the desk drawer. If she could reach it. A movement at the study window caught her attention. Thomas's face appeared briefly. He'd climbed the exterior of the house. Their eyes met for a split second before he ducked back out of sight, communicating his intentions with a series of hand signals she vaguely remembered from their younger days. Emma fired a shot toward the bookcase, forcing Cooper to stay in cover. "Your men are down, Cooper. It's just you now." "And Crane," Cooper reminded her. "Don't forget who really owns this operation." "Crane's gone," came Martha's voice from somewhere in the hallway. "Ran to his SUV when the shooting started. Loyalty isn't his strong suit." Cooper cursed under his breath, the first sign his composure was truly cracking. "Doesn't matter. I finish what I start." Emma used the distraction to edge toward the display case, keeping the desk between her and Cooper's position. Her fingers had just brushed the glass when Richard reappeared in the doorway, blood still trickling from his temple. "James, it's over," he said, his hands visible and empty. Crane's men are down. Thomas Blackwood has the house surrounded. So you've switched sides, Cooper snarled. Always the opportunist, Richard. I'm trying to prevent more bloodshed, Richard countered. Enough people have been hurt. Cooper's laugh was bitter. The great Richard Thornton, suddenly developing a conscience. How convenient. While they argued, Emma carefully opened the display case, removing her great-grandfather's rifle. The weight felt familiar in her hands. She'd learned to shoot with this very weapon, her father patiently teaching her to respect its power. "Put your weapon down, Cooper," she commanded, stepping clear of the desk with the Winchester raised. "Last chance to walk out of here alive." "That's not happening," Cooper replied, desperation edging his voice. "I've spent my entire life working. Toward this moment, my father died dreaming of reclaiming this land, his father before him." The raw emotion in his voice revealed the truth. This wasn't just a land grab or a con. For Cooper, this was the culmination of generations of obsession, of perceived injustice crystallized into vengeful purpose. "Your family's grievance died a century ago," Emma said. "Don't throw your life away for ghosts. They're not ghosts to me." Cooper's control finally shattered. He lunged from behind the bookcase, firing wildly. Emma ducked as bullets splintered the wood around her. Richard dove for cover. Through the window behind Cooper, Emma glimpsed Thomas preparing to make his move. The study erupted in chaos as Thomas crashed through the window, tackling Cooper from behind. The impact sent both men sprawling across the hardwood floor, Cooper's gun skittering under a chair. Thomas had the advantage of surprise, but Cooper fought with the desperation of a man, with nothing to lose. They grappled across the study, upending furniture, crashing into bookshelves. Emma circled them, Winchester raised, unable to get a clear shot as they struggled. Richard remained frozen in the doorway, watching the life-or-death battle unfold. Cooper managed to break free, scrambling toward his fallen weapon. Thomas lunged after him, catching his ankle. Cooper kicked viciously, his boot connecting with Thomas's jaw. The momentary advantage was enough. Cooper reached the pistol, whirling, to aim at Thomas, who lay momentarily stunned. "No!" Emma fired the Winchester, the shot deafeningly loud in the confined space. Cooper staggered, blood blooming across his shoulder, but remained standing. His gun swung toward Emma, hatred burning in his eyes. Before he could fire, Richard tackled him from behind. The unexpected intervention sent both men crashing into the antique desk. Cooper's gun fired once, the bullet embedding itself in the ceiling as the two men struggled for control of the weapon. Thomas regained his feet, moving to help Richard, but Cooper fought with manic strength. His elbow caught Richard's injured temple, stunning him. With a vicious twist, Cooper broke free, shoving Richard toward Thomas to slow his advance. "Enough!" Cooper's voice rose to a shout as he backed toward the window, gun now trained on Emma. "I won't let a Harper win. Not again. This isn't about winning," Emma replied, keeping the Winchester steady despite her racing heart. "It's about ending a cycle of hatred that's destroyed both our families." "Pretty words from the victors," Cooper sneered. "Your family stole everything from mine. Your great-grandfather ruined Jacob Cooper while building his empire on our land. And your revenge has consumed 3 generations since," Emma countered. "When does it end, Cooper? With my death? Martha's? Will that finally satisfy your family's ghosts?" Something flickered in Cooper's eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or the first recognition of the futility of his crusade. The moment stretched, the only sound their ragged breathing and the distant wail of approaching sirens. Then Cooper's expression hardened. "It ends when justice is served." He swung the gun toward Thomas, who stood closest to him. Several things happened simultaneously. Emma fired the Winchester, Richard lunged forward, and Thomas dove sideways. Cooper's shot went wild as Richard collided with him, sending both men crashing through the already damaged window. Emma rushed forward, Thomas at her side. They reached the shattered window in time to see Richard and Cooper tumble down the steep. Roof edge, both men grappling for control even as they fell. They hit the ground below with a sickening impact, landing amid the shards of broken glass and splintered wood. "Richard!" Emma called out, horrified by the unnatural stillness of both. "Men!" Sheriff Callahan's cruiser skidded into the yard, followed by two deputy vehicles. The law enforcement officers poured out, weapons drawn as they approached the fallen men. Emma and Thomas raced downstairs and outside. Martha met them in the hallway, a shotgun in her capable hands and determination on her face. "Crane?" Thomas asked urgently. "Gone," Martha confirmed. "Fled when his men went down." Outside, Sheriff Callahan knelt beside the two fallen men. Cooper lay motionless, his neck bent. At an impossible angle, Richard was conscious but badly injured, blood soaking his designer shirt. "Ambulance is 5 minutes out," Callahan reported as Emma approached. Richard's eyes found hers, pain evident in every labored breath. "Emma, I'm sorry." She knelt beside him, complex emotions churning. Anger at his deception, gratitude for his final intervention that might have saved Thomas's life. "Why did you do that?" she asked quietly. "Why save us after everything?" A ghost of his charming smile flickered across his bloodied face. "Couldn't let Cooper win." He coughed, wincing. "He played us both." Thomas joined them, keeping a respectful distance as Sheriff Callahan called in updates on his radio. "Cooper's dead," the sheriff confirmed, rising. "And we've got an APB out for Crane. His SUV was spotted heading for the county line." Emma looked up at the ranch house, her family home, now bearing the scars of violence, broken windows and bullet holes marring its weathered exterior. Yet it stood, as it had through generations of Harper stewardship. The ambulance arrived, paramedics working quickly to stabilize Richard. As they loaded him into the vehicle, Emma approached one last time. "The ranch?" Richard asked weakly. "Still mine," she confirmed. "Still Harper land." Something like respect flickered in his eyes before they closed. The pain medication taking effect as the ambulance doors shut. Thomas came to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring as the vehicle pulled away. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining naturally. "It's over," he said quietly. Emma surveyed the aftermath, law enforcement documenting the scene, Cooper's body being covered, Martha speaking with a deputy by the porch. The morning sunlight illuminated it all with stark clarity. "Not quite," she replied, thinking of Crane, still at large, of Cooper's historical documents that might contain some truth, of the damage, physical and emotional, that would need healing. "But we've weathered the worst of it." Thomas's hand tightened around hers. "Together." The simple word carried weight beyond its syllables. A promise, a possibility, a future neither of them had dared imagine when the day began. Emma looked up at Thomas, seeing beyond the scars to the man who had fought his way back from death to protect her and Blackwood Ranch. Whatever came next, they would face it as they stood now, together. 1 month later, Emma and Thomas worked side by side, replacing a broken fence post on Blackwood's northern boundary. The warm afternoon sun highlighted the changes healing had brought to both the land and its people. The ranch house windows, shattered during the confrontation, had been repaired. The bullet holes in the walls had been patched and painted over. Life was slowly returning to normal, a new normal that accommodated all they had experienced. "Hand me that post-hole digger," Thomas requested, wiping sweat from his brow. Emma passed him the tool, their fingers brushing in a touch that no longer carried awkwardness. The fence line they were repairing marked more than a property boundary. It represented their commitment to rebuilding what had been damaged. "Sheriff Callahan called this morning," Emma said, holding the post steady as Thomas worked. "They've frozen Crane's assets. The resort development is officially dead." And Richard, recovering. He's agreed to testify against Crane in exchange. And for a reduced sentence. Emma gazed across the rolling pastures. The fraud charges will still mean prison time, but less than he might have faced. Thomas nodded, driving the post firmly into Montana soil, and Cooper's historical documents. Some truth mixed with obsession. There was a dispute between our families, but records show Jacob Cooper was compensated fairly by territorial standards. Emma handed Thomas the wire stretcher. The county historian is cataloguing everything for the record. Martha's health had improved with the passing danger. She'd taken to sitting on the porch each evening, watching the sunset with quiet satisfaction, as if counting her blessings. "She said to tell you dinner's at 6, Emma added. "She's making your favorite apple pie." Thomas smiled, the expression transforming his scarred face. Martha always could read minds. They worked in companionable silence, repairing what had been broken, strengthening what remained, together. 6 months later, the grass had greened again on Blackwood Ranch, cattle dotting the hillsides like they had for generations. Emma stood at the repaired fence line, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. The evening breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers, a perfect Montana twilight. Footsteps approached behind her. Thomas, his gait now familiar and welcome. In the months since the confrontation, he had transformed from a ghost, returned to a solid presence, as much a part of Blackwood as the land itself. "Beautiful evening," he said, coming to stand beside her. Emma nodded, contentment warming her, more than the fading sunlight. "Dad always said Montana sunsets were God showing off." Thomas smiled, then reached into his pocket. "I have something for you." He opened his palm to reveal a silver medallion, new, but crafted in the same style as the one that had been buried with his empty casket years ago. An eagle soared on one side, the Blackwood crest on the other. "I had it made in town," he explained. "Thought it was time for new traditions." Emma took the medallion, its weight solid and reassuring. "It's perfect." Thomas's scarred hand gently turned her to face him. "Emma Harper, I've loved you across battlefields and years of separation, through death and return. Will you marry me?" The question hung in the air between them, simple and profound. Emma thought of all they had endured, grief, deception, violence, healing, to arrive at this moment. "Yes," she answered, the single word carrying the weight of their shared history and future promise. From the porch, Martha watched with quiet satisfaction as Thomas slipped the chain around Emma's neck. The medallion caught the last rays of sunset as they sealed their engagement with a kiss. Blackwood Ranch had weathered another storm, and like the Harpers before them, Emma and Thomas would face whatever came next, the same way they stood now, together, rooted in the land that had shaped them both.